So this month we are talking about ADHD in women, and we're talking about this because it feels like it's everywhere right now. So my story is that my counselor says I have ADHD, but you have to, in order to formally qualify or formally be diagnosed, you have to see a psychiatrist. And I've chosen not to do that because I'm really not interested in the drugs. As far as I can see, if I have ADHD, it's a bloody superpower. It's fabulous with a few little things that I have to manage, like I have a tendency to get overwhelmed and overcommit. And I have trouble concentrating if the subject is boring. Likewise, if just say I'm having an argument or a spirited discussion with someone, I can only absorb one point at a time, which leads me to either interject or to forget what I was talking about, or to just sort of nod and let the points go. So, the diagnosis is useful in understanding why we are the way we are. And as you'll see through this module, there's an argument there for whether ADHD is a dysfunction or a disease or a problem, really, because there's an argument for it being the natural state of things. After all, our bodies are designed to move and explore physically our environment. You'd have to be silly not to see the argument that sitting in a schoolroom, for example, all day is not necessarily conducive to mental health, physical health, and some people are more inclined to need to move than others. So without further ado and further lecturing on my personal beliefs, let's talk about ADHD in women. So we're trying to understand this flurry of diagnoses that's been happening the past couple of years. And part of it is women's ability to mask and fit in, and the extra pressures that are on girls and women to be quiet and to fit in. So we're talking to a few people because there has been a flurry. We've talked to Vanessa Leone already. She's a personal trainer and trains women with ADHD. But then we've also got Anna, who's a exercise physiologist and a teacher, science teacher. And then also Georgia, who is a client of ours of interviews with ADHD. And we're going to explore what it is, how it was expressed, their diagnosis pathway, and then how is that relevant to us as personal trainers? How are we going to tweak our sessions? How can we support women with ADHD? And understanding their disease doesn't diagnose them, and it's not all bad. It's actually quite amazing if you can play to their strengths. So, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. This is from ADHDaustralia.org, and it's still very skewed towards boys. It's a complex disorder, so I'm already having problems with it. I don't feel disordered. That usually develops during childhood, which affects a person's ability to exert age-appropriate self-control. According to ADHD Australia, it's characterised by persistent patterns of inattentive, impulsive, and sometimes hyperactive behaviour, and frequently accompanied by emotional regulation challenges. Now, that's only true if you're a boy, and this is the issue. Women are being girls are being underdiagnosed, and there's a sort of a few key reasons for that. Girls are more likely to internalize their symptoms. So instead of acting out with inattentiveness, they're more likely to act in and start daydreaming, so wander off on their imagination, right? They're more likely to use coping strategies to hide their symptoms. So one thing that comes up in the interview with Vanessa is how she has to make a plan immediately, and she has to write it down. And I do the same thing. I have systems for everything. If something happens, if there's an action, my reaction is this, and that knocks onto there, and therefore I never forget and never drop the ball, right? And then the third key reason is parents and teachers are less likely to refer girls for diagnosis and treatment, even if they suspect ADHD. Don't know why that is. There are three main types of ADHD. We've got hyperactive impulsive, we've got inattentive type, and we've got combination, which is a little bit of both. It can, but not always, cause significant functional disability throughout the lifespan. But there is so many treatments and so many supports, and they do not always include medication. That's really important. People with ADHD can embrace their strengths and interests, and they can put support in place where they are not as strong. So focusing on the positives, they do have hyper focus. So if they're interested in something, they can dive deep, 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 and they can get across topics in a relatively short amount of time. They learn really fast. They're very creative, and they're excellent at solving complex problems because they have this ability to go left, right, and in circles with their thinking. Girls who don't get a diagnosis obviously won't get any support, and the results of that means that they are often challenged at home, in the workplace, in the school ground, and often those challenges will persist into adulthood. And there are sometimes impacts on their work, their social relationships, and quality of life. So if you suspect you have ADHD, then it might be worthwhile for you to go get a formal diagnosis. And I did not choose to get a formal diagnosis because I kind of like the way I am. I like being an anomaly. I like being special. I like being interesting. I like learning fast. And I'm really not interested in being able to focus on something that's boring. That's my choice. And I would also argue that being able to focus on something that's boring is just weird. That's not normal. That shouldn't be normalized. But that's, again, my opinion. All right, so girls will not show those typical hyperactivity signs that boys do, okay? So more likely girls are going to exhibit signs like talking frequently or excessively, even when asked to stop. They are often extremely emotionally sensitive, and they can cry and become upset more easily than other girls. They have an extreme focus on things that interest them, but they have trouble paying attention to directions at home or at school. I have a daughter that's just like tick, tick, tick. They have a tendency to daydream or seem lost in their own worlds. They have sometimes slow and distracted movements rather than hyperactive and excited movements. They have a habit of blurting out thoughts and acting on impulses without thinking things through. Frequent forgetfulness, a habit of abandoning goals or plans halfway. They can be disorganized, which might show up as a messy bedroom or a backpack with 7 days of food in it. Consistently interrupting their peers during conversations and activities. Trouble forming and maintaining friendships. Difficulty completing schoolwork on time. Trouble sleeping, including difficulty falling asleep or waking up too early. They can sometimes display relational aggression towards peers. So things like gossip, bullying, intimidation, and controlling behaviors. And they may show a preference to strenuous outdoor activities and sports that require a lot of energy. So they might seem distracted, dreamy, forgetful, instead of outwardly disruptive. And caregivers will often not make that connection because there's not that obvious hyperactivity. So girls will compensate and cope with this disorder, bloody hate that word, with strategies like I've already discussed with the scheduling. They might spend extra time on schoolwork to get it, or chores to get it just right. They may avoid people, tasks, or activities or events that they find especially challenging. They might create conflict to deflect attention from the problems they're having. And they might check their tasks over and over and over again to make sure they're complete and make sure they're correct. So they offer short-term benefits like getting the work done, but there are long-term costs to those kinds of behaviors. And girls and women who internalize their struggles with ADHD are way more likely to develop a secondary set of symptoms, depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems. So that's kind of where I ended up with anxiety. And now I'm in the process of managing both of those disorders with exercise and food and supplements. Actually super powerful what you can do with food. So we don't know what causes ADHD. Risk factors include family history, being exposed to certain pesticides and lead, alcohol, tobacco, or trauma or injury to the brain, or premature birth. So exercise considerations. This is the exciting part. Our goal, we don't diagnose, okay, but we are in this amazing situation as trainers to lift people with ADHD up. They've been told they have a disorder, right? They've been told they're not normal and there's something wrong with their brain. What I would like to pitch is an alternate point of view, that there's not something wrong with their brain, but there's modifications that could help them manage the way they think better, right? So you'll probably find a lot of personal trainers with ADHD because it's such a variable and impulsive and spur of the moment and active job, right? We thrive in that environment. And there are hundreds of jobs like this. We don't have to be squishing people with ADHD into jobs like accounting. And the same goes for our sessions. If your client has ADHD or suspects they have ADHD, then you can channel their hyper-focus towards things that really interest them. What interests them? And you can avoid the things that bore the shit out of them, or you can come up with strategies to make it interesting. So there's games, there's play, there's variability in how they do the exercises, there's changing the emphasis of each program. When I repeat programs, I often do them backwards or left to right or front and back and just change the order of things. Undiagnosed adult women will feel frustrated if they're not getting results. So they'll berate themselves and they'll come down really hard on themselves. So as trainers, we need to be showing their success. We need to be demonstrating how well they've done on any particular day. So they walk away feeling like, I've done all right. And sometimes that can be, wow, the session was really hard. Doesn't have to be a number to show success. Women will feel like they need to try harder, be better. They're often perfectionists, women with ADHD. So again, in their sessions, we either got to absolve them of that pressure, or we have to demonstrate how far they've come, what they're already doing amazing at. Women with ADHD do not need punishment or motivation. They need absolution and they need reassurance. Women will often feel overwhelmed and exhausted by their efforts and feel like failures. So again, they need reminding how far they've come. They need a cheerleader, not a dictator. They often wonder why they can't do anything right, that they're damaging their kids or their relationships or the people around them, where it's actually more of the opposite, because they don't necessarily conform to the commonly held belief of what normal is. They're held responsible for the failures, but it's always a two-way street. Women with ADHD will have difficulty achieving their goals and they will lose their motivation, but not in the traditional sense. Okay, not in the traditional sense. If their sessions are kept variable and interesting and exciting, and their self-worth and their feelings of success are built up, in their sessions, they'll find that highly, highly motivating. And then rather than internalizing these feelings of low self-esteem and low self-worth, you'll start to support them, lift them up. Okay. So we don't want them to punish themselves. We know that women with ADHD are going to be really hard on themselves. So these tweaks will help you help them thrive with ADHD, whether they're medicated or not, to create a space where they're accepted, where they fit comfortably rather than constantly having to modify themselves and their behaviors to fit. Sorry, weird noise in my house, to fit what society says is normal and what they should do. So women with ADHD will often have less dopamine, which is the love hormone. And all you have to do to boost dopamine in someone is give them a hug, touch them on the shoulder, right? So consensual touch and exercise will result in huge boosts of dopamine. So that alone will improve their brain, will improve their feelings of worth and their feelings of success. So the general exercise guidelines for someone with ADHD is 30 to 40 minutes of aerobic movement per day, 4 to 5 days a week. And that's been shown to ease stress and anxiety, improve their impulse control. My impulse control, as I say yes to everything and then freak out, get overwhelmed and say no to everything. It will enhance their memory and their executive function. So the skills you need to plan and execute a plan. So enhancing that 30 to 40 minutes, 4 to 5 times a week, enhancing the benefits of those exercises is performing them outside. So laps in an ocean pool or walking in the bush will be more beneficial to a person with ADHD than walking on a treadmill and laps in an indoor pool. So just making sure I've covered everything. Exercise will also improve their sleep and provide a social group and support away from relationships that they may find challenging, such as bullying relationships or, say, workplace relationships where they don't quite fit in. It'll decrease their social isolation and start promoting a healthy relationship with food, and it can help with mental health problems. Other movements that benefit ADHD include ones that require an enhanced level of concentration and complexity from the brain and the body, but they will only work if the client is interested. So martial arts, yoga, tai chi are 3 that spring to mind. They require sort of a skill set and art form. Probably dance would fit in here too. Sports teams, rock climbing, sailing. All right, I'm on a roll. Those sorts of activities, because they require concentration and movement, have a double up effect. But if they're not interested in that activity, they'll find it really hard to focus and they'll probably drop out. Resistance training is the same as general population. So 8 to 10 exercises, all muscle groups, 8 to 12 reps an exercise. But 80% of women choose not to engage in weights at all. Barriers including feeling like the benefits of strength training aren't specifically for women, feeling like they don't belong in a weights room, and pelvic floor dysfunction. But for women with ADHD, weights are as equally as important, and those barriers can be like double that, because they don't feel like they belong anywhere. They don't feel like they're doing the weights right. They don't feel like they're doing enough weights. They don't feel like they're getting any success with their weights. They feel like a failure, and then they quit. So if you're going to do weights with a woman with ADHD, then they've got to be complex, compound, they've got to be variable, they've got to be different, diverse, you've got to show an improvement, and they've got to be enjoyable for the ADHD brain, which usually means gain, variations, and success. So if you suspect your client has ADHD or you have ADHD, it's not a terrible thing. Few little tweaks and you'll change the way they feel about themselves and their bodies and their training. But the next step is to refer to a GP. So the GP will take it from here, will lead the diagnosis, not you. All right, I will see you guys at the panel on Tuesday.